Some places don't feel dangerous at first. They're quiet, empty, almost peaceful. But later, when you think back, you realize something was wrong from the very beginning. Tonight, I'm going to tell you 6 real horror stories. 3 of them happened in the desert, and 3 happened during ordinary journeys, on roads people travel every day. These aren't stories about monsters or legends. They're about real people, real places, and moments that still don't have an explanation. If you're listening alone in the dark, you might want to keep a light on.
This happened not even a month ago. I'm a senior in high school, and I've lived in Nevada my whole life. There's not a whole lot to do here, but one thing my friends and I have always been into is urban exploring. We'd look for abandoned buildings, old service tunnels, dead malls, anything that felt forgotten. We'd climb through broken fences, take pictures, sometimes sneak up to the roofs or down into basements. It wasn't about breaking stuff or doing anything illegal. It was just about the vibe. The only guy in our group who always found the weirdest places was Charles. He was kind of the quiet, mysterious type. He'd show up with locations none of us had heard of. Half the time, I didn't even ask how he found them. One day, he sent us a screenshot from some sketchy Instagram account. Low follower account, blurry photos, all kinds of creepy comments under the posts. The caption on the post in question just said something like, "Dozens of abandoned mine shafts in the Mojave Desert if you know where to look." According to Charles, he had been in contact with the account, and whoever was running it had given him some areas to check out. That's all Charles needed. He was instantly obsessed with the idea. So that Saturday, it was me, Charles, and our other friend James. I had a Wrangler that was perfect for off-road desert driving, so we took that. We didn't have a specific address or anything, just a general area and a pin drop somewhere in the middle of the Mojave. The spot Charles had marked was way off in the desert, like really far from anything. We turned off the main road almost half an hour earlier, and the dirt path we were on barely looked like a road anymore. We drove around for what felt like forever. No signs, no structures, no landmarks, just endless nothing. I kept checking my phone, even though I knew we didn't have service. James was in the back, getting more and more irritated. He started telling Charles this whole thing was a waste of time, and that he had been scammed by some troll account. Charles insisted that we keep looking, so we did. He's always been stubborn with navigation, so I figured I'd indulge him a little while longer. Eventually, just as we were about to call it quits, James pointed out something off to the right. At first, it looked like just more rock and sand, but as we got closer, we saw it. This half-collapsed wooden structure built into the side of a slope. Part of the entrance looked like it had been caved in, but you could still see a dark hole behind the support beams. It wasn't huge, but it was definitely man-made, definitely a mine shaft. Charles didn't say anything at first. He just pulled out his phone, opened the offline map he'd downloaded when we still had service, and dropped a pin on it. Then he turned to James and said, "Told you," to which James said he just got lucky. But even I had to admit, it was kind of crazy. We'd been driving in circles out in the middle of nowhere, and somehow, we'd actually found one. I parked a few yards from the entrance, just off to the side on a flat patch of dirt. We all climbed out and geared up. Charles had even brought masks for us to wear. The 3 of us walked up the mine, and it looked even sketchier up close. Charles picked up a rock and tossed it in. We waited. A few seconds later, we heard it clang 3 times, then nothing. It was really deep. Charles looked back at us and said if we tripped on the way down, we were probably dead. We started the descent. Luckily, the shaft wasn't a straight drop. It sloped down at a steep angle, but not enough that we had to climb hand over hand. The ground was loose and uneven, and there were old wooden beams lining parts of the wall. Surprisingly, they seemed pretty sturdy. The deeper we went, the colder it got, and quieter. It was really eerie down there. We couldn't even see any light coming through from the entrance anymore. Eventually, we made it to what felt like the bottom. The shaft leveled out and opened into a wider tunnel that branched off in a few directions. It looked exactly how you'd imagine. Old support beams every few yards, rusted rails half buried in dirt, and a thick layer of dust on everything. There were scraps of wood and metal scattered around, maybe parts of old carts or tools. It smelled kind of stale in there, if that made any sense. Honestly, I didn't realize how much of a blessing the masks were until that point. We picked a tunnel and just started walking. None of us really said much. We weren't looking for anything specific, just exploring. There honestly wasn't much cool stuff down there. The place looked like it had been mostly cleaned out of anything worth taking. But then we heard something. It was faint, somewhere further down the tunnel. It sounded like something being dragged. At first, I thought I imagined it, but I looked over and saw Charles had stopped too. James motioned for us to turn off our flashlights, so we did. We just stood there in total darkness, listening. The sound came again. It was a sort of scraping sound, like metal or maybe even wood being dragged along the ground. It was hard to tell with the echo, but it seemed like whatever it was getting closer. We stood there in the dark for maybe 30 seconds, maybe a full minute. It was hard to tell. The scraping sound kept coming, slowly getting louder. It didn't sound too close to us, but that didn't make it any less terrifying. Then, James accidentally flicked his flashlight on and then off again. I wanted to kill him. The scraping stopped and everything went silent. Then, out of nowhere, there was this loud metallic clang from somewhere deep in the tunnel. Like whatever was being dragged had just been dropped. And right after that came the most awful, demonic scream I'd ever heard. It barely sounded human. We turned and ran, not even caring about how loud we were being. I've never run faster in my entire life. I could hear footsteps coming from somewhere behind me, and I thought I was going to have a panic attack. I was in the back trying to keep up, and then I tripped on something. One of my shoes came off, and I struggled to stay upright. I didn't have time to go back for it, so I just kept going, trying to ignore the pain in my foot. Up ahead, Charles and James had already reached the incline and were climbing. I practically threw myself up the stairs. When I tell you climbing those stairs half barefoot was the most painful thing I'd ever experienced, I'm not exaggerating. It was excruciating. I picked up a new splinter every few seconds. If not for the adrenaline coursing through my veins, I don't think I would have been able to make it out of there. By the time I finally made it out into the open air, my foot was shot. I needed James and Charles to damn near carry me over to the car. I couldn't drive like that, so James jumped in the driver's seat. I barely got the door closed before he threw it in gear and floored it. I don't think we were followed up the shaft, but we weren't sticking around to find out. We drove in silence all the way to the nearest hospital. I thought the pain was going to make me pass out. I ended up having to get a tetanus shot, and even after all my wounds were cleaned and all the splinters were removed, I couldn't walk normally for days. A few days later, once I could walk without limping too bad, James told us he'd dropped his wallet somewhere near the shaft, probably when he was helping me get to the car. He hadn't said anything at the time, but now he figured it was worth going back. Just to the entrance, no way were we going back inside. So the three of us drove back out there using the pin that Charles had saved. Obviously, James's wallet was nowhere in sight, but we did find something. My shoe. It was sitting a few feet from the mine's entrance. I cautiously walked over to it and picked it up. It was torn up, like someone, or dare I say something, had bitten into it. There were literally teeth marks in my shoe, and entire chunks of it were missing. We didn't stick around much longer after that. None of us can come up with any rational explanation. You might be quick to just say it was some homeless person living down there, but if that were the case, how the hell had they managed to stay alive for so long? There was no food down there. What in the world would they eat? Charles said that Instagram account never responded to him when he DM'd him about what happened. It's going to be a long time before I do any urban exploring in the desert again. I've always been a rugged kind of guy. I've always loved the outdoors. And a vacation to me is a camping or fishing trip, not some extravagant excursion to some resort or something. My girlfriend of 6 months shares my love of nature. That's probably one of the main reasons we started dating, if I had to be honest. A couple weeks back, Tiki and I decided to do something a little different. We drove out to the desert to camp for a few days. We'd both done forests, mountains, lakes, all that, but neither of us had really experienced the kind of open, silent, dry isolation the desert offered. It just felt like something we had to try at least once. One of the main reasons we landed on the desert, too, was the stargazing. That's something we both love, probably more than anything else. Even back when we first started dating, we'd take drives out past town just to lie on the hood of the truck and watch the stars. So when we read that this spot was far from any towns or light pollution, it was basically a done deal. I found a place online that was supposedly remote but legal to camp on. No amenities, just open land, some fire rings, and stars. Sounded perfect. We packed up the truck with our gear and made the 3-hour drive early that Friday morning. The last hour or so was on a dirt road that felt like it went on forever. There wasn't a house or sign of human life in sight. Honestly, that was half the appeal. By the time we found the campsite, it was already late afternoon. The place was completely void of people, just as I had hoped. The first couple nights were exactly what we wanted. Warm days, cool nights, clear skies. We'd sit out by the fire with a couple drinks, pass a little joint back and forth, and just talk about dumb stuff or lie back and stare at the sky. Not having a schedule or any distractions was really refreshing. And yeah, we'd fool around a bit in the tent. That was all part of the fun too. It felt good to be disconnected. Both nights though, we heard something strange. Not close, just somewhere way out in the distance. It was this low, drawn-out sound, like a howl or a moan. It didn't really sound like a person, more like an animal. The first night, we both sort of paused when we heard it. Tiki looked at me like, "Did you hear that too?" And I nodded. But we ended up laughing it off. I said it was probably a coyote or a mountain lion or something, and she agreed. Same thing the second night, right around the same time too. We chalked it up to being desert wildlife. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff out here that we're not used to hearing. It was unsettling, sure, but we weren't going to let it ruin the trip. The third night, I woke up to the sound of footsteps outside the tent. It was soft at first, just a couple faint crunches, like someone walking slowly over dry dirt. I held my breath and listened. It wasn't an animal. It was too steady and slow. I didn't move. I wanted to grab the flashlight, wake Tiki up, and say something, but I couldn't. I was frozen. My heart was pounding and every muscle in my body felt locked up. The steps didn't go around the tent. They just stopped a few feet away, and for a long time, there was nothing but silence. I stared at the ceiling of the tent, barely blinking, waiting to hear something else. But whoever or whatever it was didn't make another sound. I waited there for God knows how long, praying they'd walk away. But then, out of nowhere, I heard a flick. That sharp, unmistakable sound of a lighter. A small orange glow appeared through the fabric of the tent, maybe waist height, a few feet off to the side. Whoever was out there held the flame steady for a few seconds, then started waving it around slowly. I didn't move. I just stared at it, trying not to make a sound. And then the flame got bigger, way bigger. It went from a flicker to a glow, like they'd lit something, a torch maybe. Then, without warning, the person dropped whatever they were holding. I heard it hit the dirt with a dull thump, and a second later, the side of the tent lit up. The heat came fast, way faster than I expected, and within seconds, the fire started spreading. That's what finally snapped me out of my haze. I woke Tiki up, and she immediately realized what was happening. We scrambled, no time to think. We started tossing our stuff out of the tent and onto the dirt. I'm not even sure we got everything. We sprinted out of the tent while the fire spread. Tiki grabbed one of our water jugs and dumped it on the fire, while I tried stomping out anything that had caught on fire. Eventually, we got it under control. Half the tent was completely ruined. I grabbed the flashlight and started scanning the area around the tent, looking for the person who had just tried to kill us, but there was no one. At least, no one I could see. Tiki started packing up our stuff, and I quickly followed suit. We started speed walking what we thought was the direction of the truck. There weren't any landmarks, and it was dark, so we were practically guessing. After a few minutes, it became clear we were turned around. At some point, maybe 10 minutes into walking, I heard it again. That same distant scream we'd heard the first 2 nights. Only this time, it didn't stop. It kept going like an animal was in constant pain. And then another scream started from somewhere else, and then another one. They were all coming from behind us, but it was clear that there were multiple things out there. I didn't say anything. I just grabbed Tiki's arm and started moving faster. By some miracle, we actually found the truck. We practically threw all of our stuff into it, and I drove off as fast as I could. I couldn't go too fast though, the road was rough, and without any light besides my high beams, it felt like every dip and bend could flip us. After what felt like forever, we finally hit a main road. I didn't stop speeding until I saw other cars again. Tiki was holding it together, but I could tell she wanted to cry, and I was doing a really bad job of consoling her. We did call the police to report everything that happened. All I can think about all of this is how if I weren't such a light sleeper, my girlfriend and I could have been murdered that night in the middle of the desert. This is important context for what I'm about to tell you, so I'm going to start here. I've always been a little suspicious of my mom's past. Suspicious isn't exactly the right word, but I can't think of a better one. She was born in Mexico and spent her childhood there before moving to the States alone to pursue an undergrad degree. The rest is history. She found work, met my dad, and has lived in America ever since. I don't really know a lot about her life before America, and there's a part of me that thinks that's by design. She avoids talking about her past entirely and dismisses any questions about it with a joke or by changing the subject. Growing up, my dad always told me that it was because she had some childhood trauma that was better left undiscussed, and I believed that for the longest time. I mean, why wouldn't I? But as I grew older, I started getting more and more curious, and would often marvel at how skilled my mom was at dodging those kinds of questions at family gatherings and whatnot. Here's what I do know. She lived in a border town somewhere in northern Mexico along the Texas border. It doesn't have the best reputation being a border town and all. The closest I've ever gotten to knowing anything about her parents is a joke that she told a few times when I was younger. She would laugh that her dad's side of the family were the politicians and her mom's side were the crooks, but she was never able to tell which was which. I never read into it as anything beyond a cynical political joke, but as I grew older, I started wondering whether there was more truth to that statement than I had originally thought. Her dad worked for the government in some capacity, and she never spoke about her mother, not once. The only other piece of information I have is a name. I'm not going to write it out, so I'm just going to call him R. One night when I was around 10 or 11, I woke up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom. As I was walking past our living room, I heard my mom speaking in a quiet voice. I didn't understand Spanish, but she repeated R's name multiple times, the way someone talking about someone would, as opposed to someone speaking directly to someone. All the lights in there were off, so I couldn't actually see her, but I could hear her. Even though I knew it was just Mom, my young self was still a little scared of the dark, so I instinctively flipped the light switch on. She didn't scream or even react to the light. It was like she was anticipating that I'd be there. Instead, she immediately hung up the phone and glared at me with a look I had never seen from her. She told me to go back to bed, and I did. And that's it. That's basically all I know about my mother's past. A joke, her dad's very vague occupation, and the name R. What I'm about to tell you happened almost a year ago to date, and it's been on my mind a lot recently. I'm from Arizona, lived there my whole life. I was a year removed from graduating college, and I was driving through the desert on my way to meet up with one of my old college friends. It was a really long drive, I'm talking road trip hours, and I was tired of listening to music. I'm not a podcast guy, so I was low-key cycling through my contacts, calling up all my friends and whatever girls I happened to be talking to. Eventually, I decided to call my mom. We're both really into soccer, so we were talking about the upcoming Champions League fixtures and how exciting the matchups were. She's got some serious knowledge on the sport, so the two of us can talk soccer forever. Out of nowhere, I saw 2 pickup trucks blocking the road up ahead. It didn't look like a car accident, so I wasn't sure what I was looking at. I was worried that someone might need help or something, so I slowed down as I approached. My mom was still on the phone, but I hadn't let her know what was happening. I stopped my car and sat there, wondering if it would be a good idea to get out. Before I could do anything, 3 men sprang out from the 2 cars, all holding guns. I froze up and realized there was another car quickly approaching mine from behind. I was unarmed, so compliance was really my only choice at that point. One of the men tapped his gun on my door, motioning for me to get out. The other 2 stood a little further back. I put my hands up and slowly got out of my car. By that point, the car behind me had fully caught up and was parked a little ways away. The man barked a few commands in Spanish, but I didn't understand what they were saying. I consider my inability to speak Spanish one of my biggest failures in life, especially as a Mexican American. And in that moment, not being able to at least communicate with my assailants, I wanted to die. It didn't take a translator to know what they wanted me to do, though. Before I knew it, my phone, keys, wallet, and other personal belongings were in their possession, and it looked like I was going to be stranded in a barren desert with no viable escape. One of the men got into my truck, and that's when things took a turn. I realized I hadn't hung up the phone with my mom, and since my truck was still running, she was still on the line. I watched through my driver's side window as the man reached his finger toward the screen as if to hang up, only to pull it back, like he had changed his mind. I kept watching, and it seemed like he was listening. I instantly connected the dots. My mom must have been speaking to him. Eventually, I saw his lips start moving and realized they were having a full-on conversation in there. I obviously couldn't hear anything because the windows and doors were closed, but I knew they were speaking Spanish. I swear on my life, I'm 90% sure he repeated R's name a few times, like my mom had said it and he was making sure he heard it correctly. At some point, the other guys must have realized what was going on, because they stopped guarding me and approached the car. The guy inside rolled the window down and stared at me as he spoke to the other 2 men. After he finished talking, all 3 of them turned and stared at me, as if sizing me up. The conversation didn't last long after that. They hung up the phone and walked back over to me. They handed me all my stuff back, including my car keys. The only thing they took was the cash in my wallet. One of the men looked at me, smiled, and in a thick accent said, "Tax," as he did it. I had never been more happy to lose all my cash in my life. As I drove away, all 3 cars, including the one that had been behind me, started speeding off into the desert, away from the road. My plan was to try memorizing their license plates, but none of the cars had any. I was still in shock. After a few minutes of driving, I called my mother back and demanded an explanation. She told me that she had simply threatened to call the police on them, as she was tracking my location and knew exactly where I was. I told her that was obviously BS, and insisted she tell me what they had really been talking about. She was adamant about her story, though, and told me most of the Spanish was just her pleading her case. Even though I didn't believe her story, there was nothing I could do but accept it. I asked her to call the police for me, and she said she would. Eventually, we ended the call, and I drove the rest of the way in complete silence. In all honesty, I blocked that experience out of my mind for as long as I could, but over time, I just couldn't anymore. I'm becoming more and more sure that my mom had some kind of tie to a Mexican gang or cartel growing up. And even scarier, maybe that tie didn't end when she left Mexico. She knows I'm not stupid, so I don't know how much longer she expects to keep this charade up. I feel like I should just straight up ask her, but I'm really worried about what kind of tension that might create. Or worse, what kind of world I might be getting myself into should she tell me the truth. I need to provide some very brief context so the story makes sense. I go to a public university in California. It's part of the UC system. Some UCs like UCLA and Berkeley and Santa Barbara are much bigger, while others like mine are much smaller. Most of the big ones have their own version of what's known as a dedicated tour day, where all the incoming students go to that respective campus to tour it. But really, it's just an excuse for all the current students to throw crazy all-day parties. Berkeley's is called Cal Day, and Santa Barbara's is called Deltopia, just to give a few examples. Now, my campus is about a 2.5-hour drive from Santa Barbara, but it's sometimes customary for students from other campuses to make the drive to bigger schools for that one day. I've never really been one to party like that, so it was never something I did. But a few months ago, I realized it was my senior year and I'd never get the chance to go again. So when they asked me if I wanted to come with them to Santa Barbara's Deltopia, I decided to say screw it and just went. We drove down that Friday afternoon, the day before all the major festivities. The car was completely packed out. Hunter was driving, and the other friends joining us were Damon, Benjamin, and Armand. We're all above 6 feet tall, so the journey was painfully cramped, but it went by quickly with some good conversation and music. Once we got to Isla Vista, we spent the better part of an hour looking for parking with no luck. I'm not exaggerating about the parking situation. That's how popular Deltopia is. Just as we were about to give up, Hunter activated his charm and convinced a sorority girl to let us park in her designated spot. We all got a good chuckle out of that. So everything was going according to plan. Hunter's sister is a junior at UCSB, and she agreed to let us all crash on the floor of her apartment. That might sound a little ratchet to some, but during Deltopia, having a place to sleep is practically a golden ticket. Her and all of her roommates were super chill, so we decided to party with them that night, even though Deltopia technically didn't start until the next morning. There's one more thing I have to mention. Hunter is a really friendly guy, and because of that, a ton of people know him. He has this one friend named Amir who's a little problematic. I'm using the word friend pretty generously here. Amir is one of those guys who clings to social circles without ever really being a part of them. He's insecure, loud, oblivious, constantly seeking validation, and somehow makes every conversation about himself. And before you call me out for gossiping, Amir has done a lot of messed up stuff to my friends and I in the past, so I've earned the right. Amir had mentioned to Hunter a while back that he was also going to Deltopia. There was never any real conversation about where he'd be staying or who he was going with. He wasn't part of our plan, and none of us had brought him up on the drive down. About an hour after the crew settled into Hunter's sister's place, we decided to make an alcohol run for ourselves and her roommates. As the 5 of us were leaving the liquor store with our purchases, who do we see but Amir, just standing there on the curb with his hands in his pockets. No one said anything. We just kept walking towards the apartment, and he sort of fell in step with us like he'd been there the entire time. The first thing out of Amir's mouth once we were a few blocks away from the store was, "Why are you guys so surprised to see me?" Was this kid brain dead? Of course we were surprised to see him. There was never any plan to meet up with Amir, let alone hang out with him. And as far as any of us knew, Hunter hadn't even told him where we were staying. We all kind of ignored him and just kept walking, unsure of how this was going to play out. Things immediately escalated once we got back to the apartment. Amir asked if he could use the bathroom at our apartment, and then ran ahead of us when Hunter reluctantly agreed. When Hunter's sister answered the door, Amir walked right up to her and said, "I'm staying here," before stepping past her without waiting for a response. She obviously didn't know who Amir was, but just assumed he was part of our group. When Hunter realized Amir had lied to his sister, he was livid. I could go into extreme detail about what happened first, but here's all you need to know. Hunter told him straight up he had to leave, that he wasn't welcome there, and that lying to his sister was crossing a line. Amir didn't go quietly. He stood outside the door for another 20 minutes, trying to argue his way back in. Hunter's not the guy you want to mess around with, so Amir eventually took the hint and left. We got wasted after that, and admittedly, Amir was all any of us could talk about. We realized later that night that Hunter had been sharing his iPhone location with Amir, meaning Amir had stalked us to the apartment. But anyway, the next day was a blast. Deltopia certainly lived up to the hype. Most of the shenanigans were done by late afternoon, so we met up with 5 of our other friends, and the 10 of us found ourselves chilling back at Hunter's sister's apartment. We filled the rest of the guys in about the Amir situation, and they found it just as odd as we did. One of our other friends, Rylan, said he was pretty sure he had Amir's location. He immediately checked it, and his jaw actually dropped. He turned the phone towards us, and I swear to God, the little blue dot was showing up basically on top of us. As soon as we mentioned it though, the dot started moving away quickly, like Amir had been spying on us from a car and was now driving away. It was bizarre. Him showing up a second time was borderline psychotic, especially after Hunter had explained to him why he wasn't welcome there. We probably should have taken the whole thing more seriously than we did. That behavior was extreme, even for Amir. Instead, we all just laughed about his weird obsessiveness and continued partying. That night, after we had all crashed, I woke up randomly sometime well after midnight. I barely had time to process my surroundings when I heard glass shattering from somewhere deeper in the apartment. I shot up off the floor, looking around to see if anyone else was awake. No one was, probably because everyone had gone to sleep completely wasted. I realized pretty quickly that no one else had heard it, and if someone had broken in, I was the only one who could do anything about it. I didn't have a weapon or anything, so I just grabbed an empty wine bottle off the floor, took a deep breath, and started creeping toward the noise. My heart was pounding. When I entered the living room, I saw the sliding door that led to the balcony had been completely shattered. A huge rock sat in the middle of the floor, surrounded by glinting shards of glass. I didn't need convincing. I knew Amir was behind it. I went to go wake my friends up, when, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a closet door handle jiggle a little. I froze, more scared than I had been just moments before. I didn't think Amir had the guts to go beyond destroying property, and the thought that he had broken into the apartment terrified me. I was just about to yank the closet door open when my better judgment forced me not to. Instead, I snuck back to the bedroom, woke Hunter up, and told him to back me up. The two of us walked towards the living room, but by the time we got there, the closet door was wide open. I looked around frantically, but I didn't see him. That's when Hunter reached into the closet and pulled out this massive kitchen knife. I stared in shock. Amir had literally been standing behind the door with a knife, probably intending to injure me. He could have literally ended my life had I opened that closet door. That was the most horrifying moment of my life. Hunter and I woke the rest of the house up, and we did a sweep to be 100% sure that Amir was nowhere in the apartment. We obviously got the police involved, but all that really came of that was just getting a police report. They told us property tends to get destroyed during Deltopia, and we were one of the many victims. Before you ask, Amir had stopped sharing his location with Rylan, so we couldn't even show the police that. We had to leave the next morning. Hunter was freaked out about leaving his sister and her roommates there, especially knowing that Amir had managed to sneak in there once already. Before we got in the car, he pulled out his phone and typed out this massive paragraph to Amir. I'm not going to air it out here, but you can guess what was said. The message never delivered though. Amir had already blocked him. We all pulled out our phones and realized we had all been blocked too. Over the next few weeks, none of us heard from him. It was like he had fallen off the map completely. I still can't wrap my head around all of this. As aggressive as Amir often pretends to be, he doesn't have a history of violence. In fact, I've always thought of him as a little passive. He knows where all of us live, so I'm still worried, even while writing this out, that he's gonna do something drastic. I'll send an update should something happen. My name is Arthi. This happened a pretty long time ago, but I'd say I still remember about 90% of the details vividly. It was late April 1996. I was fresh out of basic training and I had just been assigned to an airbase as a communications specialist in San Angelo, Texas. Being stationed in Texas was great for me. I'm originally from Mississippi, and part of the reason I enlisted in the first place was to get as far away from home as possible. I was 24 years old at the time. My closest friends on base were a guy named Seabass and a girl named Kay. I've since lost touch with them, but back then the three of us were inseparable. It was a warm weekend, sometime in early April, when Seabass proposed taking a road trip to Austin for the day to experience a change of scenery. Kay and I were also getting sick of the base life monotony, so we agreed. Kay offered to drive, so we packed her SUV with our stuff and hit the road that same afternoon. About an hour into the drive, we were on a mostly empty stretch of highway when Seabass spoke up. He asked us if we had seen the car behind us pull up from the shoulder right after we had passed. I looked back and saw a dark-colored Tahoe or something similar trailing us at a steady distance. I hadn't seen it pull off the shoulder, but being as we were on the highway, it wasn't exactly the weirdest thing. But then Kay changed lanes just to see, and the SUV followed. She did it again a minute later, and again, it mirrored her move. I was confused at first, but then a minute later the SUV put its lights on, and everything made sense. We were getting pulled over by an undercover cop. Kay pulled over, and I watched as the cop pulled over behind us. I'm a pretty observant person. Processing information quickly is something I was quite literally trained to do, so I instantly realized something was off. The guy who stepped out didn't look like any cop I'd ever seen. He was wearing all black tactical gear, but nothing on him that said police. The only thing even remotely official looking about his uniform was a patch on his arm that said something I couldn't read. He didn't behave like a normal officer either. Instead of approaching Kay's window, he stood behind the car like he was waiting for something. I watched him a little while longer and realized he wasn't just standing behind the car, but was actively analyzing it. He was looking through the rear window like he was trying to see the stuff we packed. He was also checking out Kay's bumper stickers and her license plate. Seabass and Kay eventually caught on to the officer's strange behavior too, and Seabass rolled his window down before asking the officer if there was a problem. Instead of responding, the officer swiftly walked up to Kay's window and asked for her license and registration. Kay reluctantly gave it to him. He walked back to his vehicle and didn't return for a really long time. The three of us started whispering about how strange this whole encounter was getting, but we weren't sure what to do. After what felt like forever, the guy finally exited his car again, only this time, 2 other men stepped out with him. I could feel my heartbeat ticking up, so I did some focused breathing to keep calm. The original officer walked back up to Kay's window and asked her if her father was in the army or something. Kay asked for clarification, and the officer mentioned the US military bumper sticker on the back of her car. Kay laughed and said that she was the one in the military, then turned to Seabass and I and said, them too. The moment Kay mentioned we were all in the military, I noticed a shift. The guy at her window didn't say anything right away, but his body language stiffened. He glanced back at the other 2 men, who were still standing near the rear of the SUV, and then he glanced back at Kay. There was a weird silence for a second, and then he just told Kay that he was letting her off with a warning and to drive more slowly. He handed back Kay's license and turned around without another word. The 3 of them got back in the car, and before Kay could even start her engine, the Tahoe pulled off and sped away. The 3 of us were dumbfounded. Seabass couldn't stop talking about how those guys weren't real officers. They would have done something shady had we all been civilians. There really wasn't much more we could do, so Kay just got back on the highway. Austin was actually a really good time, and by the time we got back to base, we had all but forgotten about the stop. It wasn't until about a week later that I was reminded of it. I was sitting in the rec room watching the local news with Seabass when a story came on that made me freeze up. Apparently, a man and woman had been found dead in a ditch along a stretch of highway just outside of San Angelo. According to the reporter, the victims had been robbed and murdered, and investigators believe they were dumped there the night before. What really got me, though, was the next part. The vehicle found abandoned near the scene was a black Tahoe. Police confirmed it had been reported stolen months earlier, several states away. Seabass and I instantly went to find Kay, and the 3 of us agreed we had to tell the police about what we had seen. We told the police everything, and part of me felt a surge of guilt for not telling them sooner. Even to this day, I still think about how Kay's bumper sticker may have saved our lives that day. I can't help but think about how easily it could have been us in that ditch had we not been military. I've always been a really private person. That's part of the reason I've waited so long to put this story out there. I can't think of many worse things than this story getting traced back to me somehow, but I was recently thinking about how it would be a shame to leave this earth without circulating it. So here it goes. I just want people to know that I'm really stepping out of my comfort zone doing this. About 10 years ago, I was on a solo road trip from West Patterson, New Jersey to Fort Worth, Texas. I was on the way to visit my parents, whom I hadn't seen in a while. I'd moved out of Fort Worth years earlier and hadn't been back much since, so this trip felt overdue. Somewhere in the middle of nowhere, maybe Arkansas or the edge of Oklahoma, I can't really remember exactly, my car started acting up. I tried to ignore it for a while, but eventually I had no choice but to pull over. There wasn't much around, just trees, open field, and a long empty road behind me. I popped the hood and started poking around, pretending I knew what I was doing. I didn't. I was just sort of killing time, but I didn't want to admit that I was basically helpless. I figured I'd poke around for a bit, and once that failed, I'd call AAA. I didn't actually have AAA, so I was really pissed because I knew they'd charge me an arm and a leg. A few minutes later, though, I heard a car pulling up behind me. It was a nondescript, white pickup truck. I remembered noting to myself that it didn't have a front plate, or at least not one I could see. The driver's door opened and a man stepped out. If I had to guess, I'd say he was in his mid-30s, maybe a little older, but worn down in a way that made him seem older than he probably was. He had curly hair and a long, uneven beard that looked like it hadn't been trimmed in years. He seemed like the kind of guy you could tell worked with his hands a lot, if that makes any sense. He honestly kind of looked like an older version of me. Same build, same height, same hair color, just a bit less well-groomed than I am. He walked over slowly, giving my car a once-over as he approached. He didn't ask if I needed help so much as assume it. Before I even said anything, he was already leaning over the engine like he knew what he was doing. I spoke up and told him what happened, then thanked him for stopping to help me. He told me he was a mechanic, and based on how quickly he got to work, I didn't question it. I was already thinking about how I could repay him for the help when he said something that kind of surprised me. After a minute or two of fiddling, he stepped back and gave the engine a look that didn't exactly inspire confidence. He muttered something about needing a compression tester. Apparently, without it, the car wasn't going to start no matter what. Then he glanced over to his truck and said his friend, another mechanic, might be able to bring one over. I honestly had no idea what the part even was that he was talking about, but he seemed genuine, so I believed him. I thanked him again, and he pulled out his phone, presumably to call his buddy. He froze up for a few seconds while looking at his phone screen, and then put his phone back in his pocket, saying it was dead. He then asked if he could borrow mine to make the call. I didn't even think twice about it. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and handed it to him without a second thought. He took it with one hand, and then, almost in the same motion, he reached into his jacket with the other and pulled out a gun. I instantly knew what was about to happen. He didn't say much, just told me to sit down on the shoulder and not try anything stupid. His voice didn't shake. He'd clearly done something like this before, or at least thought about it enough for it to seem practiced. I did what he said. The whole thing felt strangely calm, like we were both just going through something totally normal. He rifled through my pockets and took my wallet, my backpack from the passenger seat, and even had me show him the password to my phone. Then he drove off, and that was that. I had literally just been robbed on the side of the road. I know I'm speaking about it calmly now, but you best believe I was livid at the time. I don't think even now I've ever been more angry in my life. Unfortunately, there's more to this story. Much more. I'm not going to get into too much detail, but someone eventually did stop and help me. After getting my car started, they were even nice enough to give me directions all the way to my parents' house so I could do it without my phone. I made it to Fort Worth later that night, and given the circumstances, my visit with my parents was actually really nice. The next few weeks were a blur of canceling cards, replacing IDs, updating passwords, and basically recovering everything I'd lost. It was annoying and time-consuming, but I eventually squared away as much as I possibly could, and I got on with my life. Fast forward like 6 months, and that's when things started to hit the fan. One day, I got a letter in the mail from some bank I didn't recognize. It was addressed to me, thanking me for opening a new line of credit. I figured it was a scam at first, or just some kind of junk mail, but then another one came. This time from Best Buy, with a card I'd supposedly opened and already racked up over $1,000 on. The charges were all from a random town in Tennessee. At first, I was more confused than anything, but that's when it hit me. I had forgotten until that exact moment that my social security card was likely in my wallet when I had gotten robbed. And now, the guy who had robbed me had everything he needed to become me. The next month of my life was a living hell. My credit report was a mess. Hard inquiries, new cards, balances I didn't spend. It felt like every day there was something new. If any of you have dealt with identity theft, you know how hopeless it can seem. I filed a report with the FTC, placed a fraud alert on all 3 credit bureaus, and even froze my credit. I went to the police and gave them everything I had, but without a name or a license plate, they apparently couldn't do a thing. I filed a formal report anyway, just to have a paper trail. I even called the local police departments in each of the towns where fraud had occurred. I followed every step you're supposed to follow, but somehow it wasn't enough. Things kept escalating. Whoever was stealing my identity was being extremely cautious about it. A few weeks later, I got a call from my health insurance provider. Someone had received emergency care under my name at a hospital in Georgia. It wasn't just a billing issue. There were now records in my file that didn't belong to me. Stuff that could actually screw me over if I ever landed in the hospital and couldn't speak for myself. I obviously reported everything to the police again, but that was the last straw for me. I decided to take matters into my own hands. From then on, I transformed my whole lifestyle and spent every ounce of my free time trying to track down the perpetrator myself. I set up Google alerts for my name and any recent cities tied to the fraud. I checked my credit report constantly. I scanned forums and dug through social media. I did everything I could think of. One night, on a whim, I decided to start checking Craigslist. I focused on cities tied to the fraud, places where charges had shown up from or mail had come from. After looking around for a while, something caught my eye. It was a posting from Jackson, Tennessee. The listing was for a bunch of used power tools and some other miscellaneous items. I wasn't sure why it stood out to me so much, but the longer I looked, the more familiar it seemed. And then it clicked. Everything listed matched up perfectly with some of the things that had been charged to that Best Buy card. I sat there for a while, unsure what to do. Eventually, I responded to the listing, saying I was interested in a couple of the items and asked if they were still available. I debated trying to attach a tracker link or something clever, but I didn't want to spook whoever it was. If it was him, and he got even a hint that someone was onto him, he'd vanish. So I kept it simple. To my surprise, it didn't seem like the guy was onto me at all. After exchanging some emails over the next few days, he gave me a time and a public place to meet, and he told me to bring cash. The meeting was supposed to be the next day. I debated driving all the way to Tennessee myself, but I couldn't bring myself to. There's no telling what I would have done to that guy had I seen him in person a second time. So instead, I called the police department in Jackson to see if they remembered my case. They did, and I basically pleaded with them to help me out. I gave them everything I had and damn near prayed. By some miracle, they told me the details lined up just well enough for it to be worthwhile. They said they'd at least talk to him and see if there was any information they could get out of him. The next day, after a little back and forth, I got the guy to tell me he was driving a red pickup truck. I communicated that with the police and waited. After legitimately several hours, they called me. When they told me what had happened, I wanted to drop on my knees, I swear on my life. The officer told me that as soon as the guy spotted the patrol cars near the meetup spot, he immediately sped out of the lot. He didn't even try to play it cool. That alone was enough to raise red flags, so they followed him. Not long after, the guy ended up losing control of his truck and crashing into a ditch. It wasn't a major accident, but it was enough to get officers legally involved beyond just a casual questioning. According to them, he was a total wreck, visibly shaken, panicking, talking in circles, you get it. As soon as they even mentioned the Best Buy items, he folded. He admitted he didn't know where the stuff had come from, that it wasn't his, and that a friend had given it to him, and he had independently decided to resell it. It could not have been more perfect. The guy ratted out his friends, and with his cooperation, the police were able to acquire enough evidence to arrest the real perp. I've never felt more relief in my life. Like I said earlier, I'm not trying to have this traced back to me, so I'm gonna keep things vague from here on out. I will say this much though, the guy who robbed me wasn't acting alone. Turns out, there were 3 of them total. The craziest part is that I wasn't the only victim. From what I was told, they'd been targeting travelers and isolated drivers up and down a few different interstate corridors, mostly in the south. Eventually, all 3 of them were caught, charged, and put in jail. I'm not going to say much more than that, but what I will say is justice was served.